Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to be seeing whether I can get back into film photography, as it's been about 8 months since I last shot a roll of film. So I decided to use my Olympus Pen-F this time around. It's a half frame film camera, so if you have a roll of 36 exposures, you can take, in theory, 72 exposures in a half frame camera such as this. So the reason why I wanted to use this camera is because I picked up this lens about a year ago now. It's a 25mm f4 lens, so not a particularly fast lens in terms of modern digital cameras, but I wanted something a little bit wider on the Pen F, so 25mm is equivalent to about 35mm on a full frame 35mm camera, so it's a nice everyday shooting focal length. And the reason why I wanted to test it out on the Pen F is because I haven't actually been that happy with its performance when I've adapted it to my other digital cameras. I've much preferred the 38mm f1.8 lens, which came with my Pen F when I bought it, and that does such a good job adapted to digital cameras as long as you just step it down a little bit. Yeah, so I wanted to test out the 25mm f4, and I've also got the 100mm f3.5, which it's not the best lens, but I do feel that it's good enough to keep to use with the Pen F. Also as well, this will be my first time shooting Kodak Tmax 400, which I used in this particular camera this time around, and this is the freshest film that I had in my collection, and it expired about 3 years ago, so I didn't bother compensating for that fact in the camera. I just shot it and developed it at ISO 400, which probably wasn't the best choice of film to use this time of year because it's peak summer here in the UK and we're currently under a bit of a heat wave scenario, so very bright conditions. So with ISO 400 film in the Pen F with a maximum shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, it was generally around 1/500th of a second all of the time, as well as shooting at the highest apertures I could shoot, so like f11, f16, so that did limit my ability to be more creative with my photography, so they were more like snapshotty, I would say, than having any experimentation with depth of field, etc. For this excursion as well, I put these two images up. I decided to buy a LightMeter app for my phone rather than use my old Gossen LightMeter, just because I feel like my phone is always with me and people seem to get good results, and I certainly align with that view. It did well enough for me to continue to want to use it moving forward. So I went for this one. It's called myLightMeter app for the iPhone. Basically, you can either have like the default view, or I used and preferred the classic view because you could measure a scene and then you could choose which aperture and shutter speed combination you wanted for your particular scene. But like I said earlier, I didn't really have a lot of choice due to the conditions and my decision to use ISO 400 film in the summer. But what I did as well is when I took images, and the ones that I'll talk about later on, I'll put up the screenshot from the app so you can see what I saw when I took the shot. So I know you can get special ones now, which if you had like a hot shoe, it could just slide into there and then you could use that to meter your scene. But they're quite a lot of money, so I just thought I'd give the phone app a go, and like I said, so far it seems to be working really well. So as you can probably see, I finished the roll, and hanging up here is the negatives, waiting for me to cut it and insert it into my album of negatives. Right, so I successfully managed to shoot a whole roll of film in the Pen F over about a week, and then I took special care to wind the film back into the cartridge, because a previous time I think I might have been a bit heavy-handed in terms of winding on when there was no film left to wind on, which resulted in the film snapping, and then I had to use like a changing bag to get the film out for development. So I paid extra care this time around to not go too far and stop when I started to feel resistance, and then carefully and slowly wind it back into the film cartridge, which I then managed to do, and then transferred that to the lab box in order to develop the film. Decided to develop the film in Rodino for the first time in a while, due to the fact that it was listing a shorter development time for Tmax 400 of 6 minutes, opposed to about 9 minutes for my Kodak HC110 film developer that I also use. But it seemed to work really well. Once I obviously reset up all the chemicals, I then took the time to get the temperature of the chemicals down to about 20 degrees, because that's the optimum for Rodino. So that took a bit of time, because as I said earlier, it's been a bit warm here in the UK recently, but then I was able to develop the film successfully in the lab box. So then when I looked at the results when they were drying, there was evidently some dark and bright exposures that I could see on the negatives, but as I went along shooting the film, I took some extensive notes so I could compare them and analyse them when I got back, so we'll get into that in a little bit. You'll see the B-roll that I've put up as well, but obviously when you go down the negatives, I started to see some kind of light negatives as well as some darker negatives. So I was really interested to get them digitized so I could then compare them with my notes to see what might have gone wrong in those situations. But apart from that, it all went to plan the way that I remember shooting film the last time, in terms of shooting it, developing it, and then digitizing it. It was a bit of a slog, to be honest, digitizing and processing 72 images, especially because as you saw then, some of them needed a bit more processing to get them to balance the exposure, to get them up to more where I was expecting them to be for my particular tastes. So as I said, I've analysed the results so I can hopefully determine to myself whether it was actually worth going through all the hassle of shooting film again, and whether there was anything that I could learn from this particular excursion. Right, so the big elephant in the room, first off, that I noticed was that images that I took with the 38mm lens, so the lens that does well on digital cameras, doesn't do particularly well, it seems, on the Pen-F, and certainly not in bright conditions. Even when I tried it with and without a hood, it didn't really seem to make any difference. All the photos shot with this lens using the same aperture and shutter speed settings as I did when I used the 25mm, but they just all came out almost like they were overexposed or overly bright and washed out. And I'm hopefully you're seeing that from this overlay now. Yeah, which was a real surprise, because as I said, this lens adapts really well, and whereas the 25mm, which did a stellar job on this roll, doesn't do that well on digital cameras, but it just seems to work best in its native habitat. And also as well, the 100mm did alright, even though it does lack a bit more clarity and punch sometimes compared to the 25mm lens. So yeah, that was a real surprise that this lens is a bit of a dud on its native system. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's take a look at some of the results in a little bit more detail in terms of what I think went well and what didn't go quite so well and why that might have been. So this is the very first two exposures I captured. So I'll just show this here. This is the light meter measurement that I did of this particular scene. Looking at my notes, I shot this at f5.6, it won 500th of a second. This one was with the 38mm and with the shade. As you saw from the run through earlier of the performance of the 38mm lens, I had to do a little bit of work to get the contrast and the exposure looking a bit better in this particular scene. And I was fortunate that this person walked through the scene as I was taking the shot, which I think really does add to the composition, certainly for the left-hand side of this diptych. So that was with the 38mm. Then obviously I was looking at the performance of the 25mm lens, expecting it to be worse, and as I mentioned, it performs really well. Like, this is without the shade, because obviously the shade that I found later on vignettes on the 25mm, but this one, in comparison to the 38mm lens images, doesn't require half as much processing time to get to the right level. But it's probably, even though I was just testing this, I probably prefer the composition of this one, but I appreciate the performance of the 25mm lens in this particular scene. Right, so then just touching on this image here that I haven't got a metering picture for, but it was taken with the 38mm lens, and this is probably the only one which didn't really need a lot of work because, like I said in the main video, any kind of bright light or just non-dull light, this lens does seem to perform a lot better. So that was with the 38mm f1.8 lens, probably shot at about f2 and probably about 1/60th of a second because there was not a lot of light in this composition. Yeah, I just checked my notes actually. Yeah, 38mm f2, 1/60th of a second. Right, so then let's have a look at this image. Now this image was bad. Look at how it developed. And I think the problem here, looking at my notes, 21, I think what happened here is from the time that I measured and then the time that I took the shot, the light went in. So I ended up way overexposing the scene, too much light. But I feel that I did recover it a little bit in post. Yeah, it's a real shame because I really like the composition of the woman with the pram and the guy looking up at this memorial. I just wish that I didn't overexpose it. Right, so then moving on to the next image here, which is where I tried an image with a 25mm lens with and without the shade. So you can see obviously here with the shade, it massively vignetted the frame. And if I just look at the raw image here, so this is how it scanned, you can't really see the benefit too much of the shade in this scene. So that to me almost tells me that the technology in this lens is a lot better at dealing with bright situations than the old 38mm lens. Because if you look at the metered image here, you can see it was quite bright. So yeah, this one was shot at f11 at 1/500th of a second. Like I said, I was pretty much, again, right at the right hand side of the combinations. Despite the vignette, I really quite like this this scene. And when you zoom in as well, there is a lot, despite the grain, there is a lot of sharpness in the actual image. So this one was shot at f5.6, 1/500th of a second. Again, I used the 38mm lens here, so it did overexpose quite a lot for some reason, but I just like the composition. This picture here, 37 and 38, so these were both taken with the 25mm lens and f5.6, 1/500th of a second. And again, this is the raw image, and if I just change that, you can see that it really came out quite well, and I didn't really have to do a lot in processing to get it up to where I wanted it to end up. Because I was testing the 25mm lens and I wasn't sure whether it was delivering the goods, I realised that there was actually a UV filter on the front. So I decided in this image to take an image on the left with it fitted and then remove it and take the same image again, same setting, same focus on the right to see whether there was any discernible difference. And obviously, because you can't review your images with film until now, like after you finish the roll, I decided to carry on the rest of the roll without the UV filter fitted. But if you zoom in, I couldn't really see any discernible difference. Right, so then looking at the next scene where I took with the 25mm and with the 30mm. So this was shot at f5.6, 1/500th of a second. So if I go to this image here, so if I look at the straight raw, you can see, as I showed earlier, the 38mm for some reason just does not work that well. And this is the case now. I realised that I was struggling with previous films in the Pen-F. I assumed at the time it was a problem because I was using like the Sunny 16 rule, and I just assumed there was other problems, not to do with the actual lens itself, but it's quite evident to me that there is something wrong with the 38mm lens, my copy of the 38mm f1.8. So just briefly, this is probably one of the better images of me where my wife took when she was having a go with the Pen-F, and I quite like it. But for some reason, I don't know why, but my forehead in the image is blown out. If anyone's got any ideas as to why that happened, I'd be grateful. If I look at the raw file, yeah, it's just, do you see what I mean? It's just like some of the film emulsion is rubbed off, whether it got a bit damaged. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I'd be interested in what people think. And then another image showing that the 38 had a harder time capturing the scene compared to the 25mm straight out of the camera, but I have managed in this instance to bring it back, and that was shot at f5.6, 1/500th of a second. So this was shot again, the 100mm on the left, the 38 on the right. So again, even the 100mm does a better job than the 38. It just lacks a little bit of contrast. I find the 100mm, but nothing compared to what the 38mm is lacking. So again, in post, I was able to bring it up, but this is what happens when I have to push the 38mm lens images hard. It just kind of accentuates the grain, and I just find you lose too much detail. Whereas with the 100mm lens image, you still retain, I think, a bit more detail in the scene. This is probably one of my favourite compositions from the day. So this was both taken with the 100mm lens, just in two different locations. So this is the metered measurement that I used for both of these scenes because the light was similar throughout. So f16, 1/500th of a second, so the maximum, the complete limit of the camera, and it did work quite well. And this image here was an absolute fluke. I was sitting beside the entrance, and these people came in. I didn't change the lens, so it's a 100mm lens. I didn't change the exposure, and I was in the shade here, so I just assumed that I'd massively underexposed this image, and that's actually what it came out like. But with a little bit of work in post, I feel like I've been able to recover it, and it actually looks pretty good. I actually have got a bit more of a created depth of field look in this image. This one was another disappointment with the 38mm lens. So obviously the 38mm lens is on the left, and then the 25mm is on the right. So it's weird, it works so much better on my digital cameras that I've used it with. And we're not talking about like wide open here, which it also struggles with. We're talking of it being stepped down to like f5.6. It should be better than this because the 25mm f4 is brilliant in comparison. This is one of those instances where I feel that grain actually adds to an image because there's a lot of more negative space. I just feel that if you didn't have the grain there, it wouldn't be quite as strong an image. So I do feel that in some situations, grain does help elevate an image. But yeah, this was taken with the 100mm lens. I didn't do any measurement picture for this one, but it was shot at f16, 1/500th of a second. Again, the absolute limit of the Pen-F, but it has produced a pretty good image. Left hand side was the 38mm, right hand side was the 100mm. So you can obviously see on the left where this 100mm composition was taken from. That is one good thing with the 100mm lens, in that this was shot at f8, 1/500th of a second. Yeah, you're still able to get the subject being separated from the background because of the compression effects of that 100mm lens, which probably acts like a 150mm lens on a full frame camera. Because yeah, if I just go back, like I haven't kept any of the raw images from these previous films in the Pen-F, but these were 99% shot with the 38mm lens, and I can see looking back at them now that it was the lens that was causing the issues, because you just looking through them, they are that kind of washed out, almost overexposed look about them. And yeah, this video has really opened my eyes into helping to pin down what was wrong with some of my Pen-F images in the past. So hopefully moving forward, not using the 38mm lens as much, and using some lower ISO film, I can get some much cleaner and sharper and well exposed images from this combination. Because yeah, this is probably one of my favourite Pen-F images I've captured, like I said, with this expired Jessop's Pan 100S film, which I think is probably the film that I've enjoyed using the most. I want to try and find it so I can shoot some more of it. But anyway, that's all I have for this segment of this video. Right, so time to draw some conclusions. The 38mm lens was a huge disappointment, and when I looked back at previous films, I can now see that the same issues presented itself in those films as well. And this lens, I think in the future I'll just use when it's darker, because like I showed in the alleyway photo, it does do well when it seems there's not a lot of light in the environment. But I think when it's light and bright, I won't be using this lens. But it's odd that it works better on digital cameras, whether that's because they can compensate for the flaws that this lens obviously has. And then the opposite was true, obviously, for the 25mm lens, which worked extremely well. Obviously, it doesn't work quite so well with the hood that I've bought for the 38 and the 100mm, because it vignettes quite badly. But I did find that you didn't really need it, because the photos that I did without, there wasn't really a great deal of difference. So obviously, whether this is a newer lens and it's got better coatings to help deal with flare and bright light, I don't know. Maybe that's the case. The 38mm was maybe a more older original lens without the coatings, and the 25mm was a newer lens with the more modern technology built into it. So I touched on it earlier as well. I'm really pleased with the LightMeter app. It's just one less thing that I need to carry. The phone's with me all the time, and I love that I can just take a screenshot of the scene so I can use it in these videos, and to remind myself what settings I used for a particular composition, as well as then having the classic view in the app where you can just measure for a scene and then decide on, depending on what you want to achieve from a composition in terms of depth of field, or do you wanted a faster shutter speed to capture any movement in the scene. So in terms of the film, the Tmax 400, I don't think I can draw any conclusions at this stage because I've only used one roll. It certainly didn't look too bad from my review, but I don't think the conditions were the best for it. I'd like to try it again in maybe more wintry or darker conditions. In terms of how the camera performed, I absolutely love this camera. It's just so compact. Obviously the images came out nice and sharp, or sharp for film, so that means I was able to manually focus correctly, and I love the twin like wind on mechanism as well as the mechanical sounds. It's got a great counter. Yeah, I just love this little camera. It's just a shame, as I'll get onto, that I don't particularly like shooting film these days, because I just find that the resultant images are a little bit underwhelming. And I've done a follow-on video to this, just looking at my film photography journey as a whole and where I am with it in terms of what I can do, if anything, to maybe try and make me enjoy it a little bit more. I think as well with the Pen-F, I'm certainly probably going to just try and pick up films with 24 exposures, so I can just shoot 48 exposures in the Pen-F, because I did find 72 a bit of a slog to finish the roll, and then obviously to develop it. And then, to be honest, developing was no different as to whether it was 24 or 36 exposures, but then where the time comes into it is then digitizing all those 72 exposures. But it is quite nice digitizing it yourself, because you can decide whether you want to make like an image a single exposure, or whether you wanted to combine it as like a diptych or a triptych type composition. Am I inspired from this trip to shoot more film with any real enthusiasm? And I've got to be honest, I don't really feel that motivated to certainly shoot as much film as I used to shoot. Like, I've got a camera here that I picked up recently that I want to just test that it's working, but I'm not particularly looking forward to that. I think I'm more interested in how the lenses perform these days, because obviously I'm more interested with adapting older lenses to like my GFX these days than actually wanting to use them on their native systems. But as I said, I've got another video coming up soon which I'm going to look at a little bit more into my film journey so far. But don't get me wrong, I certainly love shooting film cameras. I just don't at the moment feel that infused about the actual results. Yeah, so I think that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.